Hey y'all, Robert Barry Fleming here, Executive Artistic Director at Actors Theater of Louisville. We've got a panel today of three distinguished artists talking about new work, like one of my favorite things to talk about. Alex Lynn, Jeff White, and Jesse Wortham. They're really distinguished artists and multiple hyphenate talents. And I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, and we're going to jump right into some questions, give you a chance to ask questions, and talk about this very exciting field. So I'm going to turn this over to Alex, to Jeff, and to Jesse to introduce yourself. Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Lynn. I'm a writer, producer, actor, and I was an acting apprentice during the 2019-20 season at the Actors Theater of Louisville. And I'm also a content writer for Supercluster and A24 Films.
Jeff.
Hey, I'm Jefferson White. I'm an actor and filmmaker based in New York. I did the Actors Theater of Louisville Professional Training Company as an actor in 2012, 2013.
And Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jessica Wortham. I am an actor, audiobook narrator, and educator. And I was also an apprentice at Actors Theater of Louisville in 99, 2000. Gulp. And have done a lot of new works, both as somebody who is just participating in readings, but also developing new works physically as well, from a physical standpoint.
Beautiful. So you see what we did there? They're all former apprentices, and they're brilliant. So I'm just going to say thank you, Jesse, for launching us in our first question. Can each of you just talk a little bit about what your experience with new work is? Alex, tell me a little bit about your first experience with new work.
I'll go first. So I think I first really got exposed to really diving into new work being at the apprenticeship this past season. That started with the Solo Mio projects at the beginning of the season, where we all came up with an 8 to 10 minute one-person show. That then went on to working on the new play projects with new playwrights like Alexis Shear, Lisa Drake, and Jane B. Jones. And then working on the Humana Festival, our Humana show, Are You There?, written by Vivian Barnes, Gab Reisman, and Jonathan Norton. And that's my experience as an actor with new work. And in working in new work as an actor, I kind of found my own voice as a writer, I guess. And just started writing stuff because I was kind of waiting around for people.
Can you all talk about that intersection? What's the difference about approaching new work as an actor, and how you bridge that gap? How did you grow to your identities as writers or interpreters of new work, or creators of it?
Yeah, sure. I can go first too, if that's cool. So I guess as an actor, you're still collaborating on the new work, but you're not necessarily the one that's producing the actual written content and the ideas. That's kind of primarily the writer's job, and it's their story and their voice that you're then working to express and interpret as an actor.
Yeah, I feel like my first experience with new work was with in non-traditional structures. So with the first devising work I did was in college with a brilliant professor who sort of worked to empower us as actors to be sort of generative, creative collaborators in a room. And that sort of started the transition for me to not just feeling like an interpreter or like a conduit through which text or sort of performance flowed, but to rather sort of think of myself as a generative unit in the room, and to sort of start to enjoy the experience of generating, and then from there, I think it's a pretty slippery slope to adding some hyphens and getting more and more excited about it. Once those sort of traditional roles, those traditional creative team roles start to break down, I think that creates an extremely exciting sort of free flow of ideas and generation that I think it really was fomented then at Actors Theater, because when I was in Actors Theater, there was a lot of emphasis on devising, on solo performance. Those are sort of practices that encourage that development further.
And you do that now with means of production. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the Mad Ones and how that's kind of the foundation of where you find yourself now, as not only as a working actor in someone else's material, but also a creator of your own?
Yeah, so the Mad Ones are a brilliant theater company composed of PTC alum, I think from 11, 12, maybe from across a couple years, who came back to Louisville and did a sort of devised theater workshop with our company. And I think have done it most years since. And there's just an emphasis in their work on sort of collaborative writing and sort of generative, like impulse-led writing on a less sort of academic approach to writing and a less sort of compartmentalized approach to making new work, a less sort of traditional model. They really, in the workshop, and I think in their own work, which is incredible, focus on every sort of participant as a generative force, and also just focus on the sort of value of like short-term generation and short-term sort of creative processes. So that's something that I have a very small film production company in New York called Means of Productions, and in Chicago as well. There's we have collaborators there that are doing the same thing. We focus on making short form work that has an emphasis on like making it, seeing what happens, discarding it, moving forward. We focus on quantity and process over sort of product. You know, I think it's really important to give artists opportunities to generate in a sort of process-centric environment without focusing on the product or on the sort of reception of the product, but rather just for their own sake and for their own process.
Jessica, you work with Fiasco as someone who's a graduate of Brown Trinity. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of doing that kind of training in really extraordinary program, but one that also was a kind of bedrock and foundation for such a creative entity as Fiasco, and artists like yourself coming out of that, doing both new work and traditional classical work?
Yeah, it's interesting. That was such a gift to work on that show this season, because it was the synthesis of both my training as an apprentice and my training at Brown with the Fiasco group as well. I think what makes their approach so interesting, I mean, typically Fiasco does a lot of classical work, but a reimagining of it. And I think because of the training that we had at Brown, when I was there, it was sort of the brainchild of Paula Vogel and Oscar Eustace, who taught us, actually our first year we had something called collaboration class. And one of the reasons I wanted to go there was because I knew we would be working with the fantastic playwriting program that already existed at Brown, and working on new work the entire time. So part of that class was pairing up the directors, the actors, and the playwrights. That's the one class that we all took together. And they would pair us up for we worked on, I think over the course of the first semester, in a different genre or period that the writing style and the acting style was supposed to come from. And they would just assign a director to a playwright and a group of actors, and you would generate things that way. I think where the intersection of new work meets with Fiasco's sort of fresh approach to classic work is, I think there's such tremendous emphasis on language and language as action. And I think that is something from work I've done on new plays, as far as like readings and workshops, really letting the language do the work helps, I think, both the playwright hear what is on the page, because at some point it goes beyond their control. It is a play that's going to be sent off into the world that they will not be in the room with every time. Right. So I think having that feedback is really helpful, and just focusing specifically on the language to help drive the action of the story. And I think that is something that Fiasco focuses on in their approach to classic works, which I think is one of the reasons that they make the classic work, which can seem somewhat removed because of the language. Their practical approach to it really allows, I think, for the story to come through. So I think it's more approachable for an audience when they're sticking to strictly telling the story, as opposed to layering on lots of their spectacle is different, but you know what I mean. Like it's very focused on the actor's creation and the use of the language.
And so since there's this wide range of expression from mediated to live that we're even talking about here, can you all talk about how you navigate the dramaturgy, a dramaturg's function, and a director's function in dramaturging new work, and what your experience with that is in navigating
that? I guess I'll start. Is that right?
Cool.
Okay. I have worked, I think it depends on what type of work you're doing. I think if you're doing more devising work, the devising work that I've done has been sort of based out of viewpoints and working with Lear DeBesnay and Deborah Stein, who had a play in the Humana Festival a couple of seasons ago, Marginal Loss, who was also a Brown graduate. That process was actor driven. They gave us like research. They sort of we didn't have a specific dramaturg for that production. They kind of functioned as the dramaturg together as a unit because we were building together and trying to figure out what we're generating physically that helps tell the story. And it was all based of like physical improv based off of a research packet they gave us that was like 3 inches thick. There are other processes I've been involved in where I saw Jordan Harrison, who's another playwright who's had several premieres in the Humana Festival, working on one of his plays in college with a dramaturg, in graduate school with the dramaturg. The dramaturg helped not only sort of do the research portion of the world that we're in, if it's placed in a certain time period socio-politically, which I mean, I guess almost everything is, how could it not be? They help with sort of the research and understanding of that, but then they also, if the story's not working, I have also had the experience where a dramaturg has helped sort of cultivate how the story is told, perhaps the order in which the scenes unfold and how that can support the narrative that the playwright wants. So it really depends on, my experience with dramaturgy really depends on what if it's new work, how it's been derived. Mm-hmm. And if it's we'll stick to new work because we're not talking about classic work right now. But I think the dramaturg, I think, works best when they know specifically what the playwright is looking for from them, and the director. And maybe Robert, you could probably speak to that as well, I would imagine, as a director.
Sure. But I'm going to let Jeff and Alex
speak
now.
Of course.
I'm more interested in what they have to say. I already know what I have to say about it. I want to learn.
I think I haven't done a ton of theater. I haven't had the opportunity to work with dramaturgs in a sort of theatrical context since I left the program. But then in film and television production, there's a role called the Script Supervisor, who I think is a sort of parallel to the dramaturg in a lot of ways. And I've often worked with script supervisors who, as an actor, sort of help empower you and sort of inform you and like charge you up with given circumstances and sort of have a sort of richer understanding of the world and the context that you're operating in. And I think that in all those ways, they sort of empower you to have a greater sense of ownership of the work. I've worked with script supervisors who are so incredible at sort of helping to inform and guide the context from which you're working as an actor. And I think that's a huge way that you can empower actors to sort of feel a sense of ownership of the work and to sort of feel as though they are generative collaborators in the work. So I'm very grateful for all the script supervisors and dramaturgs who have helped empower their work in that way.
And when you're doing mediated work, kind of film, television production, where does the director and the producer kind of fit in that creative enterprise as in realizing new work?
Yeah, it's different in every context, as I'm sure it is in theater too. A lot of times, those roles, there's a sort of a whole creative team, all of whom have to sort of approach the work from different perspectives and different sort of micro macro perspectives. So often in film and television, there's a sort of director who's responsible for many departments, and there's a sort of the AD team who are sort of responsible for even further sort of compartmentalized roles, and then producers who are sort of, there are many different kinds of producers. There's line producers who are responsible for like very pragmatic details, and then there's often sort of story producers, directing producers, executive producers. There's like many layers of sort of perspective, you know, and on different productions, sometimes you have a sort of direct rapport with the director or with the producer. They sort of fill in for each other. And I think individual directors, individual producers develop their own way of communicating with cast and with various departments, and with each other. So I very much take an ant's eye perspective of all of that. That all sort of happens above my pay grade, and I mostly become aware of it when those sort of lofty folks intersect with my department, which is stand here, try to say those words in the order that we wrote them down.
How about you, Alex? What's your experience and your what you have learned in new work with working with producers, dramaturgs, directors?
So I'll speak for myself personally. I think of like the after working on Solomios and on my own like feature-length plays, screenplays, a couple of treatments and stuff, I found that like in the theater world, the dramaturg, director, and writer are really like the nucleus of creating original and new works. They are like the core of that generation. And me personally, I know when I'm writing something new, and I think this is very much influenced, honestly, by the Mad Ones workshop that we had that Jeff was talking about, that was also done my year. When I start writing something, I don't stop and I don't go back until I finish a first rough draft. That's just the way that my brain's worked, and that's what I find is most effective. So oftentimes I will meet with like a dramaturg or director friends, and there will be a bunch of things that don't necessarily make sense along the way. So it's kind of like journalism, honestly. And I might be biased because I am a space journalist, but you have like your field reporters and your fact checkers and your editors, and you're all working together to create this featured new thing.
That's great. There's a question from the chat. How did you get the fire in your belly to tell stories, to communicate stories, and whether that be on the stage or in a mediated form?
Yeah, I think it's just early formative experiences with rooms that felt very collaborative and sort of joyful. I think I had some early experiences with rooms where I felt that there's a sort of rare and beautiful kind of communion, I think, that takes place in a healthy creative process. And I think from the first time I experienced that, there's like it's like a sort of communication, a sort of direct connection to other people in a room that I think once you've experienced it, is hard to walk away from.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jesse.
I was always a very avid reader and loved reading stories, and always and how they engage the imagination, and what a pleasurable experience it is to read as a private individual, with your own imagination, and the fertile ground that is. And when I got into college as an undergrad, I knew I was going to be an English major, and I kind of fell into the theater department through the music department. And I immediately fell in love with it, because I was like, oh, wait a minute, we can tell stories with other people and enjoy the same story together? This is the stuff. So that's the sort of like the communion of people together experiencing something. You know, it's as old as the cavemen. I think there's something that we are all just I don't think biologically, that's the word I'm looking for, biologically programmed to want. Yeah, that's what did it, man. That first experience of live theater, of being like in the storytelling part of it and hearing people gasp, or yeah, that'll do it.
I think for me, what really inspired me to actually start generating like work, like writing and stuff, was the fact that being in the theater world and like in film and television, I felt like I couldn't really see myself authentically represented. I'm a mixed race person. I'm an Asian American and I'm a woman, and I just honestly, there are maybe like a handful of like movies I can name that focus on people like me, and most of them are probably pretty recent. So that kind of like absence of seeing myself and seeing my own experience told sort of motivated me to do it myself. I think I just got tired of just waiting around for somebody else to tell my story for me. So I decided to do it, and I'm positive that there are other people out there like me who need that story told too.
Yeah, is it true for most of you that being creators of your own work or being engaged with new work gives you a different sense of agency than creating work from someone else's imagination, or when you're more of a participant in the realization of that new work? I mean, what's your experience from doing new work and readings versus workshops to world premieres? How does all of that kind of stimulate or feed you as an artist?
Yeah, I think that it's a strange transition when you depart the sort of educational world and move into like the big pond of the real world. And so much of that was a journey of realizing that like you can't wait, or you can wait, but nothing's ever going to come. Like there's no, it feels like the more passive you are as a creator, the more passive you are, and as you sort of wait for opportunities to come to you, I think the sort of slow, dreadful, dawning realization washed over me that it wasn't going to happen. And in order to sort of be the artist that you want to be in the world, I think just like Alex said, in order to sort of see stories that matter to you, at a certain point, you have to start telling them yourself. Yeah.
Are any of you working on something new that is nibbling at your imagination or obsessing you at the moment? And what's that process like for you?
I guess I'll go. Sorry, Jeff. I mean, coronavirus has changed everything, right? And I've found myself as a college graduate with a BFA, and after having just completed the apprenticeship, living with my parents again and working, not that there's anything wrong with this, but working at a grocery store to try to make ends meet. So I decided to just start writing a screenplay about it. And it's got me thinking, like, I don't know. I really think what Martin Scorsese says, the most personal is the most creative, is probably one of the truest statements I've ever heard in my life. And I think it's something that every artist should feel empowered by, even though I know, like, speaking personally and from your heart can be really, really scary, but you never know what somebody else might have to hear until you express what you're feeling.
That's great. Are you working on something new, Jesse? You're muted.
Myself, I got it. Am I on now? Here we go.
Well,
Well, I'm going to be working on something new with, I believe, you, sir. new approach to something, a new approach to a classic in a new time, which is very exciting. As of that, outside of that, I've been working on doing like coaching people, because again, I'm feeling sort of like the disconnect, the wanting to be connected and communicating in person and having live discussions about what we're experiencing and how it affects sort of your dreamscape. I know I've been having like crazy dreams and like what what it's unleashing in the imagination. But like I've been writing down those things and I haven't been able to remember dreams in a really long time. And so those have been interesting. I think it's been more sort of like self-evaluation and where I am and what's important to me in my work. And part of that has to do with the current situation, but it also has to do with where I am in my life now and with having small children and how that has changed my career. And that sort of it makes choosing what you can work on. I used to just say yes to everything. and now it's really forced me to focus on, is it something that I'm really passionate about and believe in? And a lot of that has been new, if not newer works. But other than that, that's where I am right now, just trying to process everything.
How about you, Jeff? Have you found your motivation or inspiration shifting, or the current global crisis informing your new work output and content, or even process?
Yeah, it's changed my sort of creative life for sure, my sort of process for sure. I really, as a creator, sort of thrive on people in a room. I sort of thrive on the like shared energy. I'm a real extrovert, and I think of myself as a real extroverted creator. So this isolation has been a very strange experience, and it's led to like a lot of writing. I do a lot of just a very short form writing. I write like one dumb comedy sketch a day. That's my creative output. And then a part of the process for me has always been making stuff. Like I really try to take a sort of kind of maximalist, like make as much as possible, as cheap as possible approach, because I feel like I learned the most from making the work. And in the absence of that, I've noticed my writing has sort of veered further and further. I usually write to produce. I like sort of am kind of inhibiting myself as a writer because I'm thinking as a producer about what the fuck can I actually make. And now that I can't make anything, I've finally been writing stuff that I can't make, which is it's like strangely liberating. I've been writing, sketches that take place in Brooklyn apartments for like 7 years. And now that I can't make anything, I'm like, hey, it's on the moon. Here we are in an active volcano, because it feels like it's all equally abstract. The prospect of people gathering is as abstract in their, it's equally distant in their Brooklyn apartment or on the surface of the moon,
We've got another question here. When you read a play, what do you look for that tells you this will be interesting or interesting work on the stage? Not directly related to new work, but the idea of sharing that, whether it's something that's new or not. How do you find your interest? What tells you it's going to be interesting or not? What are the values in the work?
I sort of look for stuff that surprises me. I think as an actor, you're very rarely in the position to like make any choices about what you want to work on. Like as a sort of actor in the world, you try really hard to work on everything and you take the opportunities that you get. But I'm especially sort of grateful for the stuff that I read that surprises me. I think as soon as we're like very intuitive when it comes to stories. I think we're all really good at like watching a TV show and guessing what's going to happen next. We like take a lot of pleasure in sort of pre-dissecting narrative. So I'm always really delighted when something sort of diverges from that expected course.
If you had a artist that you would work with? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jesse.
Oh, I was just gonna piggyback on the last question about when you read a play, what you look for. It tells you it will be interesting. I think a couple of things: how it's told, like how the narrative is structured, and does it feel like it needs to be on a stage? Does it benefit by being on a stage? I think is a big concern. Like if I look at it, like, is this a story that actually is served by a live space with people together again, as opposed to something that we can just sort of watch in private or watch on a big screen? That those are all different things. I think language and imagery in reading a play are big sort of go-to things for me. Does it immediately engage my imagination? Do I want to see it? Right? Do I hear the voices of the people? Are the voices of the characters distinct? Do they pop? Those are things that I always think when I'm reading a script. I'm like, oh, that's what I want to see. Or if there's something particularly like that, I'm like, that's crazy. How do you even do that on a stage? I remember reading one of Jordan Harrison's plays called The Museum Play when he first, like, was an early draft of it. And it takes place in a museum, and there are several sort of magical things that happen in it where you're like, how do you stage that? Like that sort of challenge of how you do something, I think, is a reason to also do it. Yeah, it was like a skeleton claps on the stage, the bones get together, walk off. Like, how do you do that? Like, I want to see somebody do that. I want some theater magic.
Yeah, one of my favorite practitioners, Eric N. I think there's a play he's got, and then the wolf eats the moon or something like that. And it's like, cool, I want to do that. I want to figure that out. Who would you want to work with and why if you were creating new work? Who would you want to work with and why?
Is this like a free-for-all? Like,
yes, it is.
Is this like a legitimately possible, or just sort of like dreamscape? Like,
this can include living and dead people.
Okay, now I gotta think. Hang on.
I'm very predictable. I'm a Jersey girl. I love any kind of Jersey content. I would love to work with Martin Scorsese because of all of his history of his filmography and everything. But if I'm going to be like more realistic, I would love to work with Ji-Hae Park, because the first time I read her play Tearless was probably one of the few times where I was like, oh my God, I think I am that girl. And I also know 75 other people just like that girl. And I just find the way that she wrote that play, especially the fact that it's a Shakespeare adaptation, so super cool and interesting. So I would love to collaborate with somebody like that. Yeah.
I mean, people talk a lot about the voice and new work and creating your own work. It's like, there's a really interesting voice there, or I've discovered my own voice. So yeah, the why is as important as the who. Who for you, Jeff, and why?
It's like sort of a shitty answer. I really am like most excited about working with my peers. I think like we are so constantly, like blessedly so, exposed to like the work of the masters. Like we get to see the work of the masters all the time. And I am sort of most excited by people operating that I've never heard of or never been exposed to before. Like there's people in this sort of PTC community who constantly like delight and surprise me. So that's really, I think given the chance to work with anybody, I would still work with my friends.
And since all of you have been apprentices at one time or another in your growth and development, can you talk about what your experience was in developing a new play within the Humana Festival of New American Plays? What was that process like? How did that start and get realized to full production? And that could be a Humana play, or it could be new play project. It could be any new play process that you had at Actors Theater?
I'll go. I'm actually going to talk. This happened at Actors Theater, but it was after my apprentice year. My apprentice year introduced me to so many. I was, super newbie, like BA. Like I said, took my first theater class like my freshman year of college, and was like, "What is this?" So super newbie, came in, was exposed to, like, the city company was in residence during the fall, so we had 8 weeks of Suzuki training and viewpointing, and watched them apply their work to a classic play, and then they came back and did something in the Humana Festival as well, and then we did our own work with the Solomeo project. My year was the first year that the apprentices had their own showcase, or not showcase, but their own piece in the Humana Festival, and it was kind of it was the guinea pig thing. So we actually never got to meet with our playwrights, which I know that in the recent past that has been the case, that it has been a very hands-on thing. Ours was less so. But the experience that was really transformative for me was working on the 2004 festival with Rena Groff's play, The Ruby Sunrise. And that was something that it ended up being a co-pro with Trinity Rep, where I happened to also have been in school at the time, and they were going to be producing it as well, and they were having a reading of it for Rena to hear the play over the summer in between, like, my first and second years. And I read it and just sort of fell in love with the way that the story was told, and then and the subject matter, like blacklisting, and anyway. Got to be part of the initial reading for her to hear it out loud with a potential group of people, and then further got to do some workshopping of it. Then they allowed me to audition for it, even though it meant I was going to miss part of my second year of grad school. And they ended up auditioning me for the 3 young women roles, which was crazy, because there was one that I felt like that I had read and that was it. And I felt connected to it, which was hard. And then I ended up getting cast in it, and then we rehearsed it at Louisville, did it first at Actors. But through that process, the wonderful thing about Rena, and Oscar Eustace was the director of it, the wonderful thing about sort of their relationship was that they were very open to all the ideas in the room. And if something wasn't working, I felt comfortable enough as an actor to be like, this doesn't feel right, which is something that when you're approaching new work from the outside, meaning you're behind the table and you're the writer or the director, sometimes you don't get the opportunity to feel like what doesn't work internally for the actor or for the person who's actually embodying it. And just one example was, there was a scene that was supposed to be taking place in a diner, and it was in a booth. And we were having a hard time staging it because it was in a booth and it's 2 people, and it was going to be in the Pamela Brown. And it's like, well, that's just going to make the sight lines. And I was like, if you come into a diner and you're intending to eat by yourself, you don't sit in a booth, you're at the counter. And so out of that, we discussed like how that changes the dynamic of the scene, just like being able to toss out that idea and have us play with that in the rehearsal room. It became a thing in the script. They designed a different set piece for it. And it was, as an actor, I felt a lot of ownership of not just the role, because I got to work on it for so long, but also just how the story was told and shared. Yeah.
How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, when we were in Louisville, I think one of the things that was so amazing about the new play development we were doing in Louisville is that we were working on so many different projects at once. We would be sort of rehearsing our Solomeos at the same time that we were in tech for another play, at the same time that we were doing like early developmental workshops of our Humana show. And that just like gives you an incredible sort of sense of agency as a performer to sort of be approaching work from so many different angles at once. And I remember that sort of, I think as an actor, my overwhelming experience when I'm just an actor on a project is fear. It's like fear and insecurity, worrying that I'm doing a bad job. No matter how many times you're told that a developmental reading isn't an audition, you still can be paralyzed by the fear that it's just like, I don't know, as an actor, I think I often am overwhelmed by insecurity and tension and concern. And that being at Actors Theater was this incredibly empowering sort of experience, because that you no longer felt like you were sort of just waiting for a verdict. You felt like you were sort of participating in your own narrative, you know. And I think working on so many projects at once in so many different capacities, as a writer on this project, as a, you know, a sort of core ensemble member on this project, and then just as an actor on this project, you got to sort of take the kind of ownership from each of those roles and apply it to the others, which was a real gift.
Alex, do you have your hand on the mute button?
I was like, so yeah, I totally agree with Jeff about the whole being paralyzed by horrible fear and insecurity. And something that I also thought was really cool about working at Actors, I'll speak for myself specifically during our new play projects, is that working on a new work when you're so close in development with the playwright actually being in the room with you and being able to have that dialogue with them, I think is really empowering as an actor, because it just gives you that fuel to tell you that there's a reason that you were cast in this part. Whatever the CD and the director and the playwright saw in you is in you, and you can do it. That was the cool thing for me. It's just I think working on new work really allows all artists, but I'll just specifically speak as an actor right now, I guess, to unleash parts of themselves that they might be a little fearful of showing in everyday life, and also believing that that inherently is there with them and that it's enough.
Beautiful. Carolyn May asks, Carolyn May asks, how do you take big ideas and start to solidify them into words on the page? What are your specific techniques to start creating content for the stage or for new work?
This is the thing that I have the hardest time with, and this is the thing that most inhibits me from like identifying as a writer, is sometimes the more exciting an idea is, the harder it is to start. Like I will get so caught up and in love with an idea or like a concept, and then when you sit down to literally, like, there's an Anne Bogart thing where she talks about how like creation is destruction. Like as soon as you write anything, you're also eliminating the million other things that it could have been. I struggle with this all the time. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about a sort of less hierarchical creative process, is you can share that burden. You can share the burden of beginning. You can share the sort of, you can share in that first step. I have a really hard time. I very, very rarely like come up with an idea and then write it down. It's much more like somebody says something in a conversation, and then as I start to write, I'm thinking of what they said. I'm picturing my other friends saying it. I sort of try to lean on those collaborators, even in those very early stages, to feel as though I'm creating from a place of sort of shared experience and not just from my own, in which I feel a little inhibited.
That's great. I think it dovetails pretty beautifully with anonymous a question that we got here that maybe we all can kind of help weigh in on. The writer says, what advice would you give an aspiring playwright on how to get their play produced on the main stage? And close to giving up and bordering upon depression, it's been a difficult process for me. Help. And I'll kind of launch off just some thoughts about, like, I think it's important to know why you write, you know, and what you're hoping to do with that goal. Sometimes it might sound a bit philosophical, but I think it's important that the goal be the act itself at some level, because I think having an external destination that's not within your control as the determiner of whether it's a success or it's a valuable enterprise to take a journey on is in itself unempowering and can lead to a vicious cycle of depression just in and of itself. So anything that I've ever written or tried to create or develop, I wanted to also make sure that it was worthy of my time, because it was a subject that felt the expression of was valuable in and of itself, to just express, to explore, and be creative. And I think Jeff has offered something in the way that he's talked about his own work and his own process, and some of the gifts of working with great creative artists like the Mad Ones, that I've heard many apprentices use the word, that workshop helped me get away from any sense of preciousness about my work. And what I hear when I hear that is a sense of just getting to express, just getting to get in there and write, doing the act without having some external goal that is in someone else's purview to control. It can be deeply empowering if it is the act itself, the creative enterprise itself, the expression itself, the investigation and the process of inquiry about something that really seems of interest to you. That in and of itself is a great success. And wanting to really appreciate some part of that. Does anybody else have anything that they could offer to our anonymous questioner?
I'll pipe in. I don't know. I don't know what background the anonymous questioner is coming from, as far as like where they are, as other than them being an aspiring playwright. I don't know what their experience has been as a playwright. But sometimes from the outside, I think a lot of people don't realize how long it takes to get something produced on a stage. That it's rare, if ever, that somebody submits a script to an institution and they go, bang, let's do it. Like that new plays, getting new plays produced, especially speaking for the last at least 10 or 15 years that I've been doing them, it takes years to get a play on the stage anymore. People want to devote money to readings, for the playwright hearing it out loud. And then at that point, moving into workshops where you get to spend more days tinkering with and working in collaboration with a dramaturg or a director. Sometimes it can be hard to be objective when you are the only person with your play. And it's hard, it's vulnerable to put it out there and be like, read this, or to call friends and be like, could you guys get together and just read this out loud so that I can hear it and get more perspective on it? I think give yourself some grace, and know that it doesn't come like that, I think, for anybody. That it is a journey in and of itself, getting it there. So please be kind to yourself. Yeah.
Beautifully stated.
Yeah, and just like I think the idea of defining your own metrics for success is like a beautiful ideal that we all aspire to, and all fail every day. Like, I just want you to know that you're not alone in feeling depressed or anxious about not meeting some standard, some external standard, because we all do that all the time. I'm depressed all the time about the parts I didn't get. I always feel less because of the opportunities that I don't get. So just know that you're not alone. And it is, I think, exactly like Jessica said, very brave of you to continue to submit and just continue the work of like, you are brilliant. You know you're brilliant. You know your work is worth it. That's great. Great job.
Yeah, and I would also add on to that I think like rejections are 99% of what you're going to hear in this industry. I literally got a rejection a week ago, and I will definitely get more. That is just part of what happens to us when we choose to go into this field, and it's a necessary evil. But what I'll say to that is something I've always found really helpful in navigating those rejections. Always see if they're willing to give feedback. I think that is so, so, so helpful in just spinning like a positive light on kind of a sucky situation. And always being curious as to, okay, so this didn't get accepted to this thing, but if I change these things around like they were recommending, will it get accepted to this thing? Or maybe this person will resonate with it, or maybe this person will resonate with it. I think it's all a matter of, knowing that nothing you ever write is ever really like done. How can it be? And also just knowing that if you have something to say and you feel like it's important, putting your like full belief in it and not giving up on it.
Beautiful.
Can I piggyback
Yeah,
that
please,
also real quick?
Jessica.
Also making sure that that you're approaching the right people with it, the right institution with it, and making sure that it's going to the people where it belongs, or to an institution that supports your kind of work or needs your work represented. I think it's just as important to know your audience for your play as it is to know the value of your play. That's a big part of it, is knowing where it can live, because not every play is right for every institution, and that has nothing to do with you as an individual. That is them as an institution, and your art is separate from that. But it is a tangled web. And I would also put forth the great number of both actors and writers who don't really hit their stride until much later in their careers, that have worked in obscurity for 20 years before they get the thing that sort of launches them. So I just wanted to piggyback that.
Yeah, that's beautifully stated. Can each of you share a little bit of what sustains you, what keeps you resilient, and how you navigate continuing to bring yourself to new work and interpreting and creating it? What keeps you resilient and sustaining, facing another day with that?
I just lean really heavily on my collaborators in my community. I think that often I don't feel like, I'll wake up on any given day and I don't feel creative. I don't feel like an artist. I feel sort of stifled and claustrophobic and frustrated. And in those times I look to, I just like text my friends, text my collaborators. I can always trust that even if I don't feel good, or if I don't feel creative on any given day, once I start talking to my collaborators in my community, once I sort of tap into that like larger energy, like that sort of communion of sharing, there's always something out there that's going to inspire you, that's going to light your spark. There's always someone who will share their campfire with you creatively.
I've kind of always viewed, and maybe this is just sort of like the length of time I've been doing it, but I figure like what Alex said is that 90%, 99% of it is rejection. It's part and parcel of what you're going to deal with in this industry. So I have taken to every rejection is closer to the right thing. Like, it's all part of the path that gets you to the right thing for you. And I think I have a lot of faith in the universe taking care of me and taking care of us and giving us what we need when we need it, or not giving us what we think we want, so that the thing that is actually right is present for us. That is easier said than done. Let me just say, I struggle with this. I'm saying these words and I struggle with it all the time. The other thing that has helped me a lot from the back end, as when I was living in New York, I did a lot of work as a reader for auditions for various casting directors and various theater companies, play festivals, etc. And being a reader really freed me up. And the reader is the person who's in the audition, who is, reading the scene that you're auditioning with the single actor. And being in those rooms in between auditions and hearing the conversations that happen among the playwright, director, casting person, lets me know that it isn't all about me. There are so many other factors at play other than just what I bring into the room. So I just try to bring in my best work. And if this isn't right for me, but I do good work, they will bring me back in at another time. So it's always an opportunity to connect. Those are my two big things, is that just look at everything as an opportunity to expand a network, to share your talents and who you are, because you are you and no one else is. And what you bring to something, no one else will bring to it. So trusting in those things. That's what gets me through.
I think what helps me is knowing that this is not the only thing about me. like this is not the only thing about me as a human person. There are other things to me other than like the work I create or produce, and the success or the quantity of stuff that I produce is not reflective of my worth as a human on this planet. And there are a whole bunch of other things going on, and a whole bunch of other factors in life that I have to be grateful for, even if like I get a rejection or somebody doesn't like my play, or like I'm like stuck writing like some sort of treatment or something. I have my family, I have my friends, I have my health, I have all these things that are so much more than, I don't know, if I didn't get a writing fellowship or something, you know?
Erica Denise, our host, says, I love, capital letters, that answer, Alex. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Just want to accurately offer some feedback from your audience. There's one last practical question, and I want to ask the question within the question, perhaps, and it may be interpretive, but I'll ask what is written, and then I'll also just kind of ask another question next to it. Should a playwright get an agent or just publish on Amazon or other publishing websites? And I'm also wondering if that is also self-publishing or waiting for someone to identify or sign off or vet your talent to submit your work externally. Either question, both questions, what occurs to you about what you want to share with the party that asked? Should a playwright get an agent or just publish on Amazon or other publishing websites?
Do you want to go, Jeff? You got it? Okay. I'd say a couple of things. I would say if you're looking to publish, specifically if you're looking for plays and you're looking to self-publish or to at least get some more exposure that way, I would say other than Amazon, I would go to the National New Play Network website, where you can put all of your drafts, whatever you want to put that's available for people to read on there. It's a wonderful resource for directors, actors to find material, all of those things. So just specifically addressing the self-publishing thing, I would go with the National New Play Network website as opposed to Amazon. As far as getting, well, I'm going to pass to Jeff.
Well, no, I mean, I think you know much more about this than I do. I think if an agent is available to you, like an agent is basically a functionary that will help you get your work in front of more people, will make it a little easier for your work to get in front of institutions that might produce it. So I think if an agent is available to you, I think it's really worth considering. But I think that an agent's job is to help you spread your work to the people that can sort of make an impact on your creative journey. So it's a little bit like a both, maybe. I don't know. I'm not, Alex, you're maybe the writer.
That's very generous. I mean, I think it really depends on what you believe to be gained from having a literary agent and what sort of vision you have for your work. I consider myself, I think I'm early in my career, to be honest with you, but I think having like the New Play Network or New Play Exchange as well, putting your plays up on there, those are resources that are used enough that your plays can get considerable exposure, and you're not going to have to worry about something like agent fees or like what the agency wants for you. I think it really depends on where you are in your career, honestly, to really make a call.
Hey gang, we are at time. Thank you so much, Jeff, Alex, Jesse. So appreciative you have taken their time to talk about new work. Join us for our next panel. Robert Barry, Fleming, and gang signing off. Thanks for joining us.